Welcome everybody to our webinar. We have a special guest today. We have Randy Van Duinen. And if you haven't had an opportunity to see his work, I really recommend going over to his website. It's rvdphotography.com. There's some absolutely beautiful imagery there. So after the webinar, hop over to his website and you will be duly impressed and probably highly motivated to go out and shoot some more architecture. And with that, Randy, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can tell us a little bit about how you use Aurora and your shooting.
All right, well, thank you, Abba. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. I'm Randy Van Duinen. I'm an architectural photographer located here in Florida in St. Petersburg. I've been doing photography for over 30 years, and I've been doing HDR for a long time. I started way back when Dan Burkhart and Ben Wilmo started doing it, and I've really enjoyed it. And I found out it really helps me with my architectural photography. I'm just going to go through a couple things here really quick. I'll be teaching if you like what you see here, I'll be teaching a 5-day workshop out in West Coast School in San Diego. Great place to do it. There's a website, westcoastschool.com, if you're interested. Also, like Abba said, please go to my website. You'll see my portfolios there, my workshops, the gear that I use, all my camera gear and everything else, lighting. I have some videos on architectural photography if you'd like to purchase those. You'll see a checklist and my blog and all that stuff. So if you have time, please go ahead and check that out. I think we're going to get started right away here. So let me go this. Now, I work in Lightroom. It's kind of my basic workflow. So we're going to start off in Lightroom. And I want to go ahead and work on an exterior image. Here is the final image. I did a bunch of work. Let me show you the original. There was a light post in there and a fire hydrant. Didn't like those. Things are a little crooked. So we're going to try to straighten those out. And then I took it into Photoshop to remove these guys. And what's nice is how Aurora HDR works with both Lightroom and Photoshop. It's really quite seamless. So let's get started on this image. You can see right here, I have 3 exposures, 2 stops apart from each other. And so I'm going to select all 3 of those. Now, I can just go up here to export, plug in extras, and come down to transfer to Aurora HDR 2018. And here comes Aurora. There we go. And I want to put this, there we go. So now I'm going to go, a couple of things we need to do. I want it to be aligned. Even though I was on a tripod, I still want to align this. I'm also going to go ahead and remove chromatic aberration. With almost all architecture, you're going to want to hit that button. I don't care how good the lens is, you're going to get some, especially with things that are very bright and dark on the edges. There is some plants in here. I'm not sure if it's going to be moving, so I'm going to hit ghost reduction and just let it go. It's selected the medium one, that's fine. So we're there. Let's create the HDR image. And it takes a couple seconds here for this to go through. These are, I'm using a Sony in most of the cases, and I'm not sure this one is, but 42 megapixel files, it takes a little while to process those.
I noticed, Randy, that you did a 2-stop difference, but it wasn't 2, 0, and +2. You actually kind of shot a little bit to the left. What's your strategy behind that? Maybe that would be benefit to folks listening.
I basically am just looking at what I think my normal exposure is going to be. It may be, this was actually shot with a Canon. I usually found that I needed to be down about 1/3 with the Canon to be a normal. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I'd start out. That would probably be my normal, even though it wasn't at 0. That's just the way that camera works. I'm shooting with the Sony now, and the medium exposure usually is 0 now.
Thank you.
So we got this image here. Let's go through a couple things. The first thing I want to do is straighten this image. This wasn't shot with a tilt shift lens, so I want to straighten it. And before I add layers and everything else, so before I add layers, I want to straighten it out. So we come over here, they give you a lot of nice little things, and what we're going to go for is vertical. Oop, wrong way. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of straighten that out pretty good. And now, we need to crop this a little bit, so I'm actually going to go and scale it up until I get where I want. Maybe get the offset to down. And Just a little bit more, something like that. There we go. If there's a little bit on the edges, I can take care of that with contact aware fill. So we got that. That's my first thing. We're done. And now let's just go through basic adjustments. First thing I'm going to do is hit vibrance. I always end up adding some. I don't care what program I'm using. I think all the cameras shoot a little flat, so I'm going to add some vibrance. And then the next thing I'm going to do is set my black. And that gives me, make sure I have darks where I want them. Next, I'm going to try to go with my exposure and just lighten everything up just a little tiny bit. Maybe a little too much. Like so. I like that. Now with architectural photography, the shadow slider is your best friend. I always find that I'm pushing this up somewhere between 30 and 40% in most images. And it helps just bring it up. It's one slider that works really, really well. You'll see it in another image that we're going to do later, how much that helps. But I found that pretty much every image, I'm going to push that up just a little bit. And now let's take a look at our highlights. Let's take our whites down just a little bit here and our highlights down just a little bit. I'm starting to feel pretty good about this, but I still think it's a little too blue. So I want to warm it up just a little bit. That's going to be way too much. That's too much. Sometimes it's better just to put in what you want. There we go. And I'm also going to add a little bit of magenta. So that kind of gives me a little warm feeling. If you didn't know, this is a Frank Gehry building out in Las Vegas. So that's why nothing is straight on the building. So that's my first layer. This is where I pretty much am going to say, okay, I feel pretty good about this. The next thing I want to do is add a layer. So I'm going to come up here, hit plus, add adjustment layer. And I like to name these as I go through, and I'm just going to say highlight for this one. And I'm going to go ahead and look at my highlights now. There's some things, they're not going to go completely away. I mean, this is, reflecting the sun. So, but I would like to take them down a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and just looking at those highlights, try to bring it down so I get a little bit more detail in those, like so. Now, if I come up here and hit the brush right here, I can now go ahead and paint in these areas. So I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm going to take the opacity down to about 60% when I paint, just so I can kind of get a little bit softer feel. So let's paint in some of these highlights that are bothering me just a little bit. And you can see, we'll turn it off now. They got our highlights just enough. I mean, like I said, we're not going to get them all, but this gives me a more pleasing shot. One thing I should have done when I was on my basic layer is I should have come up here and done a little smart toning. And I do want to give this a little bit of HDR structure, like so. This has a lot of detail, and I do want to bring that out, and I think those helped. So let me get back up to my layer, and let's kind of just take a look at what we've done so far. There was the original, and that's what we have right now. I'm liking where this is going. I don't like some of the blue cast in the shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. If you can't tell, I like layers. I'm going to name this blue reduction. And I'm going to come down here and down to hue, saturation, and luminance. And I'm going to go to my blue saturation and take it down. Just about there. I'll select my brush again. And now still at 60%, I'll stay that. And I'm going to come into the shadows. Actually, maybe we'll take the opacity up to 100%. Come in here and paint in some of these shadow areas and just get away from some of that blue that is in there. I think this makes it a nicer feeling image. And you can see I'd probably be a little bit more accurate with it when I was painting. I'm just going to give you an idea, but we can take a look at our mask here, see how we're doing, see if we need to paint a little bit more anywhere. And what's nice is if I go over something like that, I can hit the erase button, come through and erase it. Let's turn our mask off and let's take a look how that's looking now. There's before, that blue, and now we have it looking a lot more natural. So I'm liking this part right here. I think I want to do one more thing before we're done with this image, is I want to, where is it? Where'd it go? Top, bottom, two. There we go. I want to go on the bottom. I want to take a little bit of exposure down. Oh wait, I see I made a mistake already. I needed a new layer because I don't want it to be affecting what I want. So I will hit new layer. And now I will come in here and come down. And that's the top. We don't want that. We want the bottom. And there, that just helps out just a little bit on this. And we can see set orientation. There we go. And bring this down just into that area. And maybe I'll take the exposure down just a little bit. There you go. I just like the bottom to be a little bit darker than what it was. And so this is pretty much how I did this image. Like I said, I took it into Photoshop and removed the light post right here. As you know, Luminar, I use Luminar occasionally. It has a quick, select a quick fix brush in there, but this one was pretty complicated with all these curves that I figured Photoshop was needed. So let's go on to our next image. This is an image I did. This was all done in Aurora right here. It's actually a job I just shot 2 weeks ago. It's Raymond James Stadium where the Buccaneers play. So here's my exposures, bright, all the way down, and then a really bright one. So just to let you know, I do not have any blue sky. So I realize I'm not pulling out a blue sky out of this one. If I did that, I'd have to go into and do some selection. But I'm just going to select all of these images right here. Now, we can go through and I could go ahead and do this and it would take a long time. These are all 42 megapixel images, but let me just go through and do this part just to show you. This part, transfer. And these would be how all my images that I would do it. I would do the adjustment and I would do chromatic aberration. So here is our image that we want to start out with. Again, I want to start out with my basics, add some vibrance, set my black point, probably take the exposure up like so, liking that. Add some shadow and take my whites down a little bit, my highlights down a little bit. The color here is looking pretty good, so I think I'll stay with that. We're going to add some smart toning. Always add a little bit of that, and I'm going to add just a little bit of structure. I mean, these are supposed to be realistic images. They're supposed to be for a client, so I really don't go crazy with the HDR. I'm trying to make these as realistic as possible, but I like to give them a little bit of punch. And I'm liking that. Let's add some contrast. And that's looking pretty good. All right, so that's going to be our base layer. Now we need to go through and let's refine this and make this image look a lot better. So first thing I'm going to do, add a layer. And I'm going to call this layer Remove Blue or Blue. All right, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my hue saturation, go to blue, and take it down here. I've noticed I have some color blue light contamination here. I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to do that. I also think with that, I'm going to add just a little bit of contrast, just to help punch it a little bit when I do it. So now I select my brush and I go here and start right there. And you can see how it takes that blue right away. Go a little bit smaller, go up here, kind of get that where it's coming in. We have some contamination over here, so I want that gone. And I think I'll go right into that window, right down here. And this wall back here seems to have a little bit of it, so a little bit of contamination all through that. And so I'm just going through and trying to take it so that we have warm lights being, the main part of the shot, but we have, daylight coming in, and we have to correct for that. And this helps out. Now I noticed down here, there's some blue contamination too. So I'm going to go ahead and just paint on the wood and take some of that blue out of there. And let's see how we're doing. So that's where we started. That's where we're at right now. All right, let's go for another layer. I notice this right here seems a little flat. This seems a little flat. So I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to go ahead and contrast. And I'm going to go ahead and just bump up the contrast like so. And I'm also going to bump up vibrance at the same time. I'm going to select my brush and come into these areas right here and start painting with some contrast, just to get a little bit of that back. That really helps out there. I might even do a little bit there and there. I might even come in there. So let's turn that one off and on, just see what it did. There we go. And these are subtle, adjustments, but they really do help make the image. This is what, the clients are looking for. I didn't like what it did there, so I'm actually going to take the erase and erase that area. I didn't like how much that happened. So I got those. I also didn't like how this is so bright, and it actually could use a little contrast too. So I think I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. Just going to call it sign, just so I know. I'm going to go ahead and bump my contrast up again. Take the exposure down. Actually, probably take the shadows down. It would probably work a little bit better for this. Yeah, like so. And maybe, and then let's add a little bit of vibrance. See if that helps. All right. Again, select my brush and come through and start painting this area right here. I did a mistake there, guys. You know what I did? I hit erase instead of paint. So let's try this again. There we go. I knew something wasn't right. I'm actually going to delete that layer. Sometimes it's better off just to start over and do it right. So again, we had contrast, some vibrance, and a little bit of exposure. Hit our brush. Make sure we're on paint this time and come through here and paint, and that's a lot better. Again, I'm doing this fast and not very precise, but you can kind of get the idea of what's going on here. I'm actually going to come in here and do that on this area right there. And now I want to add a couple little highlights to this. So let's, one more adjustment layer. We'll name it. We're going to come down here and hit exposure. just want a little bit here, but kind of looking there, a little bit of contrast too. Hit our brush. Come in here and paint on this sign. This was really important to the client. And let's make sure this gets a little bit more. And maybe these guys could use just a little bit of highlight. And so there we go. We went from that, our original, to this. You know what? One more thing. I forgot there was one thing I really wanted to do on this. Let's add one more adjustment layer. I know. And all I want to do on this is clean up that top a little bit of the ceiling. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it up and actually maybe make it just a little bit bluish. All right, hit my brush, make it a really big brush, and just gonna go ahead and paint on this ceiling just a little bit. Might even do it a little bit more. There, I like that. That was kind of nice. Just added a little bit of that ceiling seemed a little dark, and it kind of made the image feel dark. So by lightening the ceiling, it kind of made the whole image open up a little bit. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do these windows. There wasn't anything in the exposures that I had. So I was happy with this image right here. So let's say done. Actually, it's, and
somebody had asked if you would bring up the green of the trees outside the window. If that would be something you would consider.
I mean, you know, it's something on another image that we're going to work on. I would. This one, I just don't think there's a lot there. We can always give it a try. Let's go ahead and get hue saturation. Hit our greens with a little bit more saturation. And let's see if luminance will help this at all too. Maybe exposure just a little bit. Brush. It helps, you know. I wouldn't, you know. To me, I really like the skies. This is something where I may, and it was my fault when I actually photographed it. I should have had one more darker exposure, but it was just really kind of, we had a foggy morning, so there really wasn't much sky there to get when we photographed it. All right.
Somebody had asked about the reflection, the purple reflection, I guess, the floor onto the front of the desk. Is that something that you would leave just to give it more of a tactile feel, or would you step in and try to balance that?
In this particular image, we actually shot a separate group of shots with black cloth on the floor, so that the red that you see in the reflection actually goes away.
Ah.
So that's not something I would do in this section of it. It'd be something I'd have to do some more post-processing on. It's something that was, you know, when we photographed it, we saw it and wanted to darken that area, which it did. The purple, you know, it's something that maybe I try to get, maybe take a little saturation away from it than add anything to it. So.
Did you use strobes here, or was it all ambient natural light?
This is all ambient natural light. So this was no strobes. On the original, I mean, on the shot too, we did do some strobes later on for the windows that I put in, but they still did, like I said, they really didn't help because there was no windows to really put in. So this works fine. And there, if you know, there goes away the purple a little bit just by taking a little bit of saturation away from it, and maybe take that down a little bit. There we go. So guys, this is an image I photographed in Italy in Siena. I love this image, but it was really, really, really hard to do. I tried every HDR program that I had to do it, and Aurora HDR was the only one that was able to pull this image together. You're going to see right here from the shots, it is, you know, very extreme. I mean, that's what we have to work with. I tried everything and none of them did anywhere as, none of them did well. I mean, really, Aurora is the only one that pulled this image together. And I'm so happy because I really ended up liking this shot a lot. So here's our file of those 9 images brought into Aurora. I didn't want to spend all the time, you know, to go ahead and I did the same thing. I did alignment, I did chromatic aberration. It was all 9 images. And I tend to shoot 7 to 9 images when I do these things. Someone says, how do you decide if you're just only going to shoot 3 or 5, 7, or 9 or whatever? I go, the farther I'm away from home, the more images I'm going to shoot, because I want to make sure I get that image, because I'm not going to be in Sienna, soon. So here's the image. You can see Aurora's already kind of putting it together here for us. So let's start with this. My first thing I'm going to do is go ahead, add some vibrance. I am going to take up the shadows. I am going to go ahead, smart tone this a little bit. I will give this, since this is not for a client, this is for me, I will give it a little bit more HDR structure. I'm going to give it some contrast, and I'll probably warm it up just a little bit. Probably more than that. Something like that, maybe a little magenta too, maybe it's a little too warm. So something like that, and some more contrast I liked. So there's my basic adjustments. I'm going to take my whites down a bit and take my highlights, but even with that, I'm still not getting what I want in there. The next thing I want to do is come down to hue saturation, go to luminance, go to my blue, and see if I can bring that down a bit with some saturation, just to see if I can start to get that sky in there just a bit more. All right, so that's my basic, my first edit for this. Now I'm going to start adding some layers. An adjustment layer, and I'm going to sky. Come down here, and let's just go with exposure first. Take our exposure down. Take our whites down, and take our highlights down. And come down here to saturation. Make that bluer, make our luminance a little darker. Maybe make your saturation a little bit more so you guys can see. That's a little too much. There we go. So now I'm going to hit or select my brush, and I'm going to zoom in on this image right here. Let's go 50%. And I'm going to start brushing. And you can see I'm bringing in some more of that detail in the clouds without it going too extreme. I'm just going to brush in real quick here. So we get a little bit smaller brush and come in tighter.
What lens did you use for this?
This was a 12mm fisheye lens. And it was it's an off-brand, it's a manual lens. It's actually, I think I paid $350 for it. So it's not an expensive lens. And you can tell that if you look in the corners, they're a little soft, but I love playing with fisheye lenses. They're a lot of fun. I don't get to use them in my day-to-day work. I mean, it's a very rare thing. I mean, most of my architectural work is done with 17mm or 24mm tilt shift lenses, and that tends to be my my bread and butter, the 24 especially. So let's come in here and just kind of, and if I was doing this, I would take a little bit more time than this to come in here and do this. Let's see how our mask is. See where we're going here. But I do want to get this a little bit better.
Now, the earlier one was a Canon. Is this one also Canon, or was this more recent?
No, this is my recent. This is a Sony. It's the A7R2. That's how come I decided not to try to merge these. It would just take too long. They're 42 megapixel files. And I'm going to use the erase now and just erase around some edges. It just takes a little bit of time for that. And I wanted to go through a few more images than spend the time just watching the thing spin around. So let's take our mask off. Let's actually go back to fit on screen. And now look at this right there. That helped out a lot. And it's still, I can still see where I need to go around and adjust it, but it ended up doing pretty good job of even that quickly looking really good. The next thing I want to do is work on these shadows areas just a little bit. And I'm going to add an adjustment layer. And what I want to do here is add some vibrance and add some contrast. And just a little bit of fill. And then use my brush and start in these areas. Now this is a very subtle adjustment, but it just added so much, I thought, to the image. So let me just kind of go. It's a very subtle, let me actually put a little bit more contrast in there, so you guys can kind of see what's going on here. So this just added a little bit more. They seemed a little flat when I originally did the merging, and I wanted these guys to be brought in a little bit more. So let's see now. There, and it's just a very subtle brush, but it did help out. And I think that was pretty much all I did with this image. I really liked the feel of it, and I thought it turned out really well. And like I said, none of the other programs even got close to it. None of them could do anything in the shadows like Aurora did. They were either too noisy, they had pixelated, or they're still too far apart. So I really am happy how Aurora did this image.
Now, you had 9 exposures for this?
I did 9 exposures, yeah. And I like doing more exposures. I find, and it's just my belief, that instead of doing 2 stops, doing 1 stop in between, the transition when it's blended together is better. I don't know if I have any facts. It's just the way I see it. I've talked to some other people that do it the same way because they think it makes a better transition. Mm-hmm. Not to say that 2 stop differences wouldn't get you here. I just think the transitions work better and you get a little bit more detail, especially in the shadows. The highlights, not so much. I mean, a lot of times I end up throwing out the brightest exposure because it's too bright. But in the shadows, I think doing 1 stop instead of 2 stops, you get a better image.
Excellent.
This is for the residential photographers. This is the image that we want to end up with. And these were the exposures that I used. And when I did this blending, I did not use the very last one. I only used these 6 right here. So let me
Are you one of those photographers that saves everything? Because these are large files. Or do you willingly let some of them go?
No, I keep everything. Everything is is saved. I mean, I have to just because of my clients.
Hmm.
If, you know, if someone says they want something, I have to be able to have it for them. And, you know, if they come back and say, hey, you know, can you change something later on or do something later on? I have to be able to have the file there to do it.
Gotcha.
All right. So let's go ahead and work on this a little bit. And here we go. So here's before. This is already what Aurora's done. It's done a nice job. This is a yellow room in here. It's not white, but I do want to first bring the exposure up a little bit. Bring my vibrance up a little bit on this. Bring my shadows up. I think I will cool it down just a little. I think that's a little too much.
So some folks have been asking, you know, when you make these decisions to warm something up, to brighten something, to darken it, to bring in contrast, is it just subjectively your gut says it needs this, and you just toy with it until you get the
No,
right vibe, or no?
no, I actually, I usually have at least one assistant with me, and I have an exposure target.
Hmm.
So I have the assistant go in there with the exposure target and I shoot that so that when I bring it back, I can click on that and have a pretty good judge of what the color should be. I do then take some artistic, you know, um, I can't even say the word. I can't even think of it. Anyway, I do
License.
artistically correct it a bit to what I think is pleasing and what should be right. Even though technically it might be off a little bit, I think it's going to be better for the client. They'll like it.
Hmm.
I do end up changing colors on some things because we're using a lot of, you know, when I do some of these commercial buildings, we have daylight coming in. We have halogen lights, which are tough to go with fluorescent lights and everything else. And we're trying to mix a lot of light together. So a lot of times there's a lot of color correction that needs to be done. Even like in this image right here, I'm going to go ahead and have to change, you know, clean up some blue areas because we got some warm light in there. And now we also have some blue on the white sofas that do not look right. All right, so let me go ahead and let's start with this. Since we're talking about color, let's work on that one right away. Actually, did I get my highlights right? No. I want to take my highlights down a little bit and whites down a little bit. Bring this up and bring contrast up a little bit. Something like that. We'll see. We're going to come down to the blue luminance and just see if we can put any blue in that sky. Nope, not going to happen there. So we'll do that in a layer. So let's start and add a layer. And we'll call this blue just because we're going to correct the blue contamination. And all I'm going to do on this one is come down to saturation and blue and take the saturation down probably 50%. Take my brush and start painting on the sofa. You can see how that right there takes away some of that blue cast right there. On the wood, over here on this guy right there, just on that kind of reflects a little bit. Up here on this glass area, this seems a lot bluer than it should be. So we're going to take that down. And pretty good, a little bit there maybe. There we go. So I'm just going through and just seeing where there is some contamination that I don't want. And you can see there it is before and after. In here a little bit too. All right, so we've done that. I do want now to go ahead and see if I can get some more out of these windows. So we're going to add an adjustment layer. Name it windows. And what I'm going to try to do first is go down to green, luminance, see if that helps. Not too bad. I kind of like what it did with the windows. Let's see if this helps at all too. A little bit of exposure. And don't want it to go too crazy. So now we're going to go with our brush. Select it. And go ahead and paint on some of these windows. And now I can come in here and say, yeah, maybe I can darken it down a little bit more. It's too much. And, you know, we'd have to come through here and, oops, don't like that. A little bit smaller brush. Come in there and just kind of see if we can play around with these corners. But already you'd have a hard time telling that I did something with those windows, even this roughly. But that helped out. That might be a little overkill, so I could go ahead and take the opacity down right here, just a little bit on the whole thing. Yep, I didn't do anything over here. Let's see if I can get that. Yeah, so that's one little part of that. I also want to lighten up some areas. So again, let's add a new layer. Highlights. And let's go ahead and just take our exposure up a little bit and take our shadows up a little bit. Select our brush. Make it a big brush so this is nice and soft when it comes in, and start kind of painting where we want to bring a little bit more interest into the shot. And I don't think that one needed as much interest over there. So maybe I'll go ahead and change opacity to 50% and just paint a little bit in there. Paint a little bit in there. And this time I'm going to go back up to 100% and try to lighten this up a little bit. Oops, that might be too much. To catch up a little bit. Here we go. There we go. That's looking a little bit better. Maybe a little bit brighter back here too. Kind of like that. And get a big brush and just kind of paint this in just a little bit. So we end up, this is where we started. This is where we ended up. Ooh, not liking what I did here. So I'm going to take the erase at 30% and said, I went a little crazy right there.
But what's great about this is you can see how non-destructive it is. You know, you can easily go back at any point and adjust your blending and adjust.
And I also love using layers for this. You know, it really, it just, you know, I've been doing Photoshop for so long that having the layers, being able to go back and adjust things. Like if I say, you know, I look at the windows now, well, maybe that's just even still too much. I can go ahead and just dial it down a little bit more and make it look a little bit more real. So after I've done some other adjustments, I might just say, yeah, that's not right. I can go back to a layer and bring down the opacity or maybe erase areas. And so this is why I like Aurora better than some of the other HDR programs, is this ability with layers to be able to adjust it, to be able to paint in and everything else. And that's really made working with HDRs a lot easier for me and a lot better. So how are we doing on time?
We're doing fine. There was a couple of questions while we're here. One person is curious if you ever use Aurora just for a single exposure, for a non-bracketed shot.
I have not. I find out when I want to use it, I want to use it for HDR because, that image needs the extra help. A single image, I have not done it with.
Mhm.
I've seen, I think Trey Radcliffe do it, and it looks like it worked really well for it. So I could see where you could. I just haven't done that myself.
Nice. Somebody had asked if you have any advice if their camera only can bracket 3 images. What advice would you give them for dynamic range and settings?
I mean, if you can, I would, I'm on a tripod, so that's number one. Shoot your 3 brackets, and if you need to, shoot another 3 brackets, either brighter or darker. You'll have a couple that are overlapping, but you'll get the extra couple of stops that you need.
And that's also where the alignment comes into play when you bring all those in. That if the
That's right.
tripod shifted a little, Aurora can fix that for us.
Yeah. Well, if you looked at that one that we did from the Siena, from Siena, Italy, that one was handheld, and you could see each shot was moving, and the alignment did a great job of putting that together, especially considering how dark some of those images were and how light some of the other images were. It really put them together well. The alignment. I've been happy with the alignment. I've been really happy with ghosting. Other things that other programs I've used, there's these artifactings all over. Aurora has done, I think, a fantastic, or Skyloom has done a great job with it, as far as working on that ghosting and getting it working really well. I've been really happy with that.
I think what's also fascinating is when people think HDR, they think of those extreme images, and you're using HDR to give us a much more natural image that our eye would see when we were in that environment.
Yeah, and that's kind of the world I live in with architecture. I don't have that, ability to go and push things. People want them to look real. I look through different places and I see bad HDR, and I want to scream, because I know it doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to be super crazy, especially for things like this. For this right here is basically, I mean, I shoot mostly a lot of commercial architecture. I don't do residential as much anymore, or hardly at all. But for someone who's doing residential photography, this right here would be a great one. I did it really quick. I didn't spend much time in there. I could spend a little bit more, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time going through it. I got a good image, better than a lot of what you see in some of these real estate magazines that people put out.
Excellent. I think people also have to go to your website for those folks listening in and watching, because this is just one aspect of Randy's skill and style. You have to see some of the other images that he's created, which have a whole different vibe, a whole different feel, a whole different um, reason for the shot. And so you have to explore that. I think they would be pretty surprised at how diverse your portfolio is.
I know. I've been doing this for a long time, and I enjoy doing photography. But I also found out that um, I don't. I need projects. To keep creative, to keep learning. I need projects. That's how come we were talking about Disappearing Florida, that I did many years ago. It was really my first HDR project. It started out as a small personal project, ended up being a 3.5-year project, with me traveling around Florida taking pictures whenever I did some of my other architectural jobs. The surreal stuff that is on my website was a personal project where I I was done doing something. I needed something new. I decided to become good at compositing, and have just had a blast doing it. But it keeps me creative. It keeps me learning. And even doing the compositing has made me a better architectural photographer, because I've taken aspects of that and incorporated it into my architectural photography, along with like light painting. I've taken that and incorporated that personal work into my architectural photography. It's made me a better architectural photographer.
I think that's great advice. That's you still got to keep the passion.
You do. I started out and I worked with 2 photographers that it was just a job. And I swore to myself I was never going to make it just be a job. I love doing photography so much that I was going to keep it fresh, keep doing my stuff, and never have it just be a job. And I've kept that promise to myself for over 30 years.
Excellent. Are there any more questions that from the people watching? We have about another 5 minutes. I want to make sure that if people had questions, we can
I
forward them
can
to Randy.
I can go through and do one more image if
That'd
you'd
be
like.
great. Absolutely. Love watching your work.
All right. And this lets you know this is the way it ended up when it was all done. So I'm going to go ahead and select 4 images, and we'll go through here and edit in Aurora HDR. Yep, alignment, remove chromatic aberration, don't have to worry about ghosting. And reason, these are JPEGs. These are really big JPEGs, but it was when I was first testing out my camera and I hadn't had the settings right. So instead of it being a raw file, it is large JPEGs.
And
All right, so there's the image. Now we can work on this. All right. So first thing I want to do is I'm actually going to take my vibrance down a little bit on this to make it easier. If you look in here, you see these lights. There's some fluorescent lights here. And this is really pretty much a white building. So normally I would take vibrance up. This time I'm going to take it down a little bit. And that kind of takes care of those fluorescent lights there. I'm going to go ahead and bring my blacks down. Bring my shadows up. Bring exposure up a little bit. Too much. Let's bring the shadows up a little bit more. Bring my contrast up. And still going to take my blacks down. All right, so there we go. So that's my basic thing. I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer. I am just going to go ahead and bring up more shadows and bring up a little bit of exposure. Like so. Like so. Take my brush and just start painting in here. These hallways were really dark, so I want to brighten those up a little bit. Actually going to make it a little bit bigger brush and just even brighten it up down here and up here. Liking that, but I still would like to get a little bit more here. I like what's going on, but there's just certain spots. So I'm going to go ahead, create one more layer and bring up the shadows this time because it's a little bit more subtle. Hit the brush. A little bit smaller brush this time and just paint in some of those areas where I thought it was just a little exposure. Not too much. Like so. Just kind of blend this a little bit more. Looks pretty good. And there you go. I mean, here we go from where we started.
Pretty dramatic difference.
Yeah, I really liked how this worked on this. It was actually, when I originally did this image for the client, I pieced it together, and then I tried it later on when I got Aurora, and I really was impressed with how fast it was able to take care of things that I had to actually piece together with different exposures. And I think that's probably pretty close to our time, Eva, is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much right on an hour. But I think you covered quite a bit. And if I had anything that I walked away from this session is just how powerful it is when you use all the layers, when you just are using layers to work on a specific area and paint in those corrections. It really is very effective and very powerful.
It really is to me. This, compared to other programs, this is what really I think helps set it away. There's a lot of other things, but for me and my workflow and how I have to adjust things, having layers, have the ability to go in there and work on those layers really makes it an effective program.
Well, thank you so much, Randy. This was a joy to watch you work. It's a rare opportunity we get to actually see how an architect photographer thinks when they're developing. So thank you very much. And I'm going to throw it back to Lori.
Okay, so what I'm going to do here, folks, is I'm going to switch the screen over to me. So hopefully you can see my main screen up here. It's a Skylum website. Everybody see that? I'm going to take you through a couple things that might be helpful for you for after this webinar that you can go back and learn a little bit more. And I also want to show you where we're going to be posting Randy's video afterwards as well. Okay, so I'm at the skylum.com website. And on the left-hand side, you should see a menu item when you go to this website. Just click on that. You'll have access to a lot of Luminar features and questions and answers, etc. But what we want to do is focus here on Aurora HDR 2018. So if you click on that little button there, this will take you to the main page for Aurora. And if you go underneath the education menu, it's the drop-down menu here, one of the places I want to show you is this video tutorial section. Abba and I work pretty diligently with others and with our own content on this particular site here. And this is where we post a lot of our webinars, inspirational and core skill videos, etc. So probably what's going to happen here in just a few days is Randy's webinar will be at the top. So again, you can find it right here. And it'll say webinar Randy Van Duinen webinar. So you'll be able to see that easily. So you can go there, check that out. We also have user manual. I want to click on this because I think this is really helpful. This is an introduction to Aurora HDR 2018. And this has almost every, well, it does. It covers every slider, every feature, every filter, every preset that you'd be interested in seeing. So if you have any questions, you can always go in here, take a look, and find out more information. We also do have a support team as well. So if you have any specific questions, you can always, ask Skylum, let's see, support@skylum.com, or you can go into some questions and answers here. One thing I did want to point out that I think is really a cool feature, we keep adding more and more to this, is we do offer some free and paid presets. And we also have some textures this time around too, some free textures. And how you can access that is if you go to your Aurora program, under categories, you see where it says get more? Just click on get more and that'll pull up the website that will give you some freebies that you can download. So we're continuing to add to this. Abba has some experimental preset packs here. Richard Harrington added some really nice textures. So feel free to download those. Okay, anyway, I just want to show you a few things that might help you in your learning process for Aurora. We always love to hear suggestions and feedback from you as well. Okay, Abba, any last words from you? Any last
I would
words from
just
Randy?
want to thank Randy very much for taking the time out to show how he does his work. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in for taking the time out of their day to learn a little bit more about Aurora HDR and how they can make it work even better.
Great. Okay, thanks, Randy. Thanks, Abba. And thanks, everyone.